Department of Agriculture, with the Ohio Department of Agriculture, and today I'm going to give a very brief sort of update and overview on our H2Ohio program here at the state of Ohio and the Department of Agriculture, and also a very brief mention of our watershed program as well. So just to sort of introduce myself and my role, I am a part of the ODA Regional Watershed Program, which was started a few years ago, and it divides the state into the 7 watershed regions you see on the map there, which are based on large, what we call 6-digit hydrologic unit code areas. So examples of those within Ohio would be Region 1 being the Western Lake Erie Basin, Region 4 being the Scioto River, Region 5 the Muskingum. My region, Region 3, includes primarily the Great and Little Miami rivers with a little bit extra. So what I do and what my counterparts do within these areas is working on regional planning and water quality program development, along with supporting more local watershed planning, particularly supporting the county soil and water conservation districts, and then supporting the state's H2Ohio program, which is what I will primarily be speaking about today. Just a brief outline of what I'll talk about. The H2Ohio program I will introduce briefly in case anyone listening might not have heard of it or may have only heard about certain sub-programs within it. And I'll go through the ODA portion of the H2Ohio program, including our Lake Erie program, our new statewide program, and a few other smaller initiatives within it. And then I'll take a brief moment to circle back and talk about our regional watershed planning, which again is along the outlines of those watershed regions I just mentioned. So the H2Ohio program was launched towards the end of 2019 by the DeWine administration as a water quality improvement program focusing on a few key water quality issues: harmful algal blooms, nutrient pollution, failing septic systems, lead contamination. So it's a large multi-agency program led by us at the Department of Agriculture, along with DNR, EPA, and the Lake Erie Commission, along with support from many other partners. I already mentioned the soil and water conservation districts, but the Nature Conservancy, many other similar groups are partners with all of our agencies as well. So at ODA, we primarily focus on the harmful algal bloom and nutrient pollution goals, but septic systems and lead contamination is more along the lines of EPA. So I'll primarily be talking about the ODA program, but I did want to give brief mention of the others as well, just in case anyone might have heard of those or might otherwise be interested. The DNR program is a wetland creation program. The map you see there is a little out of date now, but the sort of purplish and green dots you see all represent wetland project sites within the state. It's been a popular and successful program, and it continues to produce new projects on an ongoing basis. You can see from the map, the highest concentration is in Northwest Ohio in the Lake Erie Basin, but it is available statewide and continuing to enroll new projects statewide. The EPA program is more infrastructure-based, looking at basically domestic household water quality, replacing lead service lines, and in some cases, failing sewage systems or treatment systems. And then I also wanted to briefly mention the new Rivers program, which was launched towards the end of last year, which includes, well, actually it includes all 3 of the agencies that participate in H2Ohio, and has several subcomponents: a polyfluoral alkyl substances study, which is sort of an emerging contaminant, a dam removal program for dams that no longer serve a functional purpose, but can cause problems for water quality and aquatic life, and a few other monitoring and conservation efforts, but I won't be speaking at length about any of that. I just wanted you all to be aware that it exists. But to briefly summarize the ODA H2Ohio program, our focus is on implementing agricultural BMPs to improve water quality, particularly looking at phosphorus and nitrogen from agricultural activities. This is done through cost share programs that are administered by the county soil and water conservation districts, which I mentioned, To explain those a little bit more, if anyone's not familiar, every county within Ohio and most other states has a soil and water conservation district. These districts work closely with farmers, with the state government, the federal government, other partners to protect natural resources and improve water quality through the implementation of various programs, practices. Some of them do education. So they're the ones who administer this program at a county level for us. So back to the ODA H2Ohio rollout. It started in 2020 in the Western Lake Erie Basin. The counties you see outlined in green there are the ones that primarily cover the Maumee River Basin. And they were the first counties enrolled in 2020, with the counties in yellow following in 2021. So the Western Lake Erie Basin, which I'll talk about more on the next slide, that's been the primary area of focus for the program. But this year, starting in 2024, we do have a statewide expansion. So now, additionally, all of the counties you see in white and blue are enrolled or are eligible for the program as well. And just to give some context for the amount of funding going towards this, the ODA portion of the H2Ohio program has roughly $60 million a year going towards it through the program, and has for the last few years, and will through the current biennium as well. There it is. So I mentioned that the Western Lake Erie Basin was the primary focus thus far. The reason for that is the widely known and highly publicized water quality issues with Lake Erie, specifically harmful algal blooms, which were particularly highlighted by the Toledo water crisis several years ago now. So in the aftermath of that, the state committed to a 40% annual phosphorus load reduction. I believe with 2008 was the baseline year for that number. And so as part of that program to meet that goal, the ODA H2Ohio program was created. As far as the current goal for the program, as of 2024, we're looking to enroll 2 million acres of cropland across the 24 county area. And to give perspective on where we've been so far, as of last year, we were at about 1.5 million acres. I think at present, thus far through 2024, we're probably at about 1.8 million. It's not quite at the 2 million yet, but making progress towards it and hopeful to continue. And even the 1.5 million figure that we already had represents about 1/3 of the eligible cropland in that area. So there has been a lot of interest and success, more than 2,500 contracts in the map you see there. Each blue dot represents or approximates one contract. So basically each of those represents one farm enrolled in the program. But as far as what that means, enrolling acreage, that means enrolling it in best management practices. The 10 that you see on the right of the screen there were the ones that were originally outlined by the program when it was created. I'll speak more about them in the following slides, but at present, or as of 2024, all 10 of those originally designated practices have now been implemented through H2Ohio, most of them through the ODA program, and then the wetlands through the DNR program. So I mentioned that the program was rolled out in a few waves with slightly different practice naming and payment rates and things like that. But for the most recent enrollment for 2024, which includes, is basically the re-enrollment for the original counties, which had their original contracts run through to completion. It's now been sort of consolidated and streamlined into these 4 main practices: the voluntary nutrient management plans, subsurface phosphorus placement, manure incorporation and utilization, and overwintering cover crops. So I will speak about each of those briefly. The voluntary nutrient management plan, or the VNMP as we call it, is sort of the baseline, fundamental, foundational practice for us. Excuse me. This is basically just a plan that outlines how much and what types of fertilizer and or manure a farmer is going to apply, where and when, according to soil test data, cropping plans, and projected yields, things like that. the basic concept is to not apply more fertilizer than is agronomically necessary. The idea being that the best way to prevent excess nutrients from running off is to prevent them from being placed in excess in the first place. So it's not a program to say don't apply fertilizer, it's to say try not to apply more than is needed. And the VNMP is, as I said, sort of the fundamental practice within the program. So all of those 1.5 million or 2 million acres start with a VNMP, after which farmer has the option to potentially include other practices as well on top of that. Subsurface phosphorus placement basically refers to applying phosphorus fertilizer in such a way that it's below the soil surface as opposed to, say, just broadcast on top. The reason for that is that leaving it on top of the soil surface increases the potential for it to run off during a rainfall event, basically. So as I mentioned, this is a phosphorus reduction program. Reducing phosphorus runoff is a key goal, so that's why the subsurface phosphorus placement is useful. Manure incorporation and utilization. Most nutrients applied in Northwest Ohio are commercial fertilizer, but it is also an area with some pretty dense livestock production. And so manure that is applied to the land is also a potential source of runoff. And so the manure incorporation and utilization is conceptually very similar to the subsurface phosphorus placement. Pretty much the same idea, applying it at the right time and in such a way that it's not just sitting out on the soil surface where there's a potential for a rainfall event to contribute to excess runoff. So that's another important practice for us. Finally, overwintering cover crops, which also includes overwintering small grain crops and forage crops. In past iterations, those were counted as separate practices. For the latest one, it's all been combined into one that achieves essentially the same thing. Cover crops have a lot of water quality and also soil health benefits, reducing nutrient losses, potentially reducing erosion, some additional nutrient uptake potentially. It's also a very popular and prolific conservation practice, so it does get a lot of people in the door for the program and is useful in that way. So those are the main practices for the program. As I mentioned, there have been a few different rollouts, but the payment rates you see there on the screen now represent the most recent ones for the most recent enrollment. $10 an acre just for developing the nutrient management plan, 10 to 15 per acre for implementing it. The difference between the basic and precision plan is the basic, or not plan, but implementation. The basic implementation is basically just applying a flat fertilizer rate to an entire field, however many pounds per acre across that entire field. Whereas the precision rate involves using soil samples based on either zones or grids to use variable rate application technology to apply more precisely, as the name implies. And that does require more technology, and that's why there's a higher payment rate associated with it. 20 per acre per subsurface phosphorus, 60 or 35 for manure, the bonus for the low soil testing fields. The reason for that is that historically, and in some cases even in the present, a producer who has livestock is always going to be producing manure, and that manure has to be applied. There's nothing better to do with that, right? And it is a useful material for supplying nutrients. But in some cases, a producer might end up applying manure to the same fields year after year, which contributes to what we sometimes call legacy phosphorus fields, where they have very high nutrient buildups that can cause issues. So that incentive is to try to mitigate against that. And the overwintering cover practice, which I mentioned, can include small grains and forages, $40 per acre. So that is a summary of the Lake Erie Basin program. Right now, ongoing through May. The state is now rolling out the statewide program, as opposed to the Lake Erie program, which has the several practices I just briefly went through. This one is more limited in scope. It's only focusing on nutrient management plans at present. with the potential for new practices in the future. Also more limited in acreage. The Lake Erie counties in the existing program or the previously existing program are in gray on the map here. As I mentioned, there's a 2 million acre goal for that area versus only 500,000 across the entire rest of the state. So more limited in scope, but again, with the potential for expansion in the future. The varying shades of red you see on the map here correlate with the amount of cropland acreage in each county. So each county has basically a goal for enrollment for how many cropland acres to enroll in the program, ranging from roughly 20,000 in the darkest red to maybe only 1,000 or a few hundred in the lightest counties, because in many cases, those counties have very little row crop acreage to begin with. So as I said, this rollout is still ongoing, but looking forward to completing that and doing more statewide in the future. So that represents the bulk of the ODA H2Ohio program, but we do have some sort of additional smaller programs within it that I'd wanted to touch on. The Equipment Purchase Assistance Program in the Lake Erie area helps support farmers by helping cover interest payments for equipment that could help them with implementing H2Ohio practices. Farm phosphorus plots are an educational field day program that's ongoing. There are a few other research initiatives. I'm not going to really touch on any of that very much just for the sake of time. But since this is sort of an edge of field practices focused lunch and learn series, I did want to mention that we have a few of those within the program as well. Drainage water management, the conservation or two-stage ditch program, and then our new working lands buffer program. So I'll go through each of those pretty briefly here. Drainage water management. So you can see an example of one of these structures pictured there. So if anyone's not aware, subsurface drainage is a very ubiquitous and useful installation on agricultural fields of Northwest Ohio. This allows the field to drain water more quickly, which in places like Northwest Ohio is beneficial both for being able to work the field and actually farm it and for crop growth conditions. But the potential downside of that is it can, in some cases, allow nutrients to run off more quickly. So what a drainage water management structure does is you can sort of think of it as an adjustable dam sort of thing on that structure, and you can basically adjust the structure to change the water table within the field. And if used optimally, this can enable you to retain more water in the field, both reducing outflows, total water outflows, and cumulative nutrient outflows. So this is a more site-specific, situationally applicable practice versus the broad many acre practices that I've already discussed. $1,500 per site for a drainage water management structure, $4,000 if there's also a sub-main being constructed. So that's also a useful practice that we're glad to have in there. The conservation ditch program. So I just mentioned subsurface drainage, but of course there's also a lot of surface drains in Northwest Ohio and throughout the state, which are ditches. So you can see in the upper right there a diagram of a conventional ditch versus a two-stage ditch or a self-flowing ditch, which we sort of have combined to call conservation ditches. So the drawback of the conservation ditches is that they take up a lot more width, which can be a disincentive for farmers who want to, put as much cropland in as possible. But in exchange for that additional width, there are a lot of potential water quality benefits from the wider benches or sides, basically we call them benches. And what that does is it creates more opportunities for sediments to settle out, lowers the erosive potential, increases the opportunity for nutrients to settle out rather than ending up running downstream. And so this is sort of again, a more site-specific practice available to soil and water district or county engineers. There are maintenance requirements. There are only a handful or two of these going in through this program per year, but it is a very good practice. Our engineers have said that in terms of cost, dollars per pound of phosphorus reduction, the conservation ditches are some of the best practices we have. So we do like to put those in where they're applicable. Finally, the Working Lands Buffer Program. This is a brand new program in 2024, still sort of rolling out right now in the Western Lake Erie Basin area. It's very similar to USDA programs for buffers and filter strips that you might or might not have heard of, like the Conservation Reserve Program. In fact, it was sort of conceived as a way to incentivize landowners whose existing buffers had run their course within USDA or other existing programming. This is a way to incentivize them to keep those areas within buffers or filter strips now that with the new source of funding. So $200 per acre for 2-year contracts. A lot of interest thus far, still a lot of things being worked out, but we're excited to be offering this now as well. And so that, I think, concludes the brief summary of the ODA H2Ohio program. So I did want to very briefly, in just a couple minutes here, circle back and mention the regional watershed program and our planning efforts, which again, you can see the smaller inset map here shows all of the waters or the regional watershed, the region, I'll just call them the regions. And then this here is region 3 with a breakdown of smaller watersheds. So what we did with our planning effort over the last few years was synthesize a lot of data that exists either for smaller watersheds or for counties. Includes land use data, water quality data, soil data, protected areas, a whole lot of data. And those plans are now available since last year on the ODA website. The goal of this planning is to basically inform conservation planners at various levels, the state level, but also more local levels. I mentioned already our soil and water conservation district partners, who are the closest partners we work with at ODA. And they do many of the districts work on local conservation planning, which we call non-point source implementation strategies, or NIPSIS plans. So a big goal of these plans is to support those efforts. Additionally, guiding H2Ohio expansion, I mentioned that we're now statewide, but as we look to expand the practice offering statewide, that might vary, for example, in Southeast Ohio, where there's not as much row crop acreage, and grazing practices or things along those lines might be more applicable. And then we're also using these plans to look at and leverage new regional scale initiatives, which there are several prospective projects going that probably aren't ready for a presentation or formal mention at this point, but we're excited to move forward with potential options there as well. And so I think that's about all the time I have to speak. Yeah, appreciate the opportunity to speak, and would be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Ben. Is there any questions? I think you're able to just unmute, and then if you have any question.
I'll mention that if you wanted more information about the H2Ohio program, there's a lot available online. It should be easy to find if you just Google H2Ohio, or if you email my address there. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Similarly with the, I'll scroll back a couple slides, the Regional Watershed Program. If you wanted to look at those, the QR code there should lead you directly to the page that has those, or again, I would be happy to answer any questions, especially about my region, but if you had questions about another part of the state, I would be happy to answer those questions or get you in touch with someone else as well.
Hey, Ben, I think Helena, she had a question. Is there monitoring data at the HUC 12 level?
Is there monitoring data at the HUC 12 level? Yes, there is. So the Ohio EPA has a lot of HUC 12 data, which I didn't include any maps or anything within this presentation, just for for brevity's sake. But so yeah, within the regional watershed plans, we have maps showing or highlighting some of the impairments at the Huck 12 level that each region has. So things like E. coli impairments, aquatic habitat impairments, nutrient impairments are some of the things we highlight and look at. So yes, there is data and at that level.
Ben, I have a question actually. For the
Sure.
conservation ditches,
Mhm.
is that program currently available in Southwest Ohio, or actually it's only still mainly in the Northwest Ohio?
I That's a good question. Originally I know it was only Northwest Ohio, the Western Lake Erie Basin. I'm trying to think. I think it might have been expanded statewide, but I might be thinking of the Cascading Waterways program though. Um, I will double check on that and get back to
Okay,
you, Zhao Chang. That
okay,
is a good question.
all right,
I know that yeah, it has mostly been focused on Western Lake Erie Basin thus far, but I'll check and get back to you.
okay. Is anyone else have some questions for Ben?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak, Xiao Chang, and I appreciate everybody who tuned in to hear it.